Hey y'all, Biohack here. I am so excited to bring you this video. This is going to be the most free-to-play friendly, accessible team to take down Phantom Shogun's Grove on stage 25 that you are ever going to find. That's right, we are doing Phantom Shogun stage 25 using all rare champions, and the gearing requirements are crazy low. So if that's something you're interested in, please, first off, scroll down, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to do that. You ready? You do it? Okay, good. Then I'm going to jump in and show you how the team works. Okay, so how is this team going to work? Well, essentially there's 3 required components of the team to make everything run smoothly. First requirement on the list is we need a cleanser champion with a 3-turn cooldown. In the video I'm going to be showing you here, we're going to use Reliquary Tender, who is a void rare who can do this, removes all debuffs from all allies on a 3-turn cooldown. This champion's job is to remove the Enfeeble buff after the boss spreads it from your Enfeeble tank to the rest of your team. The boss does that every 4 turns, so we want this champion to run at a 3-to-4 ratio with the boss, cleansing right after the boss spreads the debuffs to all your team. Okay, so that's kind of the core component of this team, and I want to mention that the rest of these champions in the team are not strictly 100% required. You can do this speed tune any way you want, but this is just the easiest, most accessible way to do it. Okay, so what that is we need a champion to be our Enfeeble tank. In case you're unaware of how the boss mechanics work, on his A3 ability, he will put Enfeeble debuff on the champion with the most crit damage on your team, and that will cause any champion with that debuff to always weak hit. And then on his A2 ability, he will spread that debuff to your entire team, which will cause your whole entire team to weak hit if you don't cleanse it off. So the cleanser is there to remove it after the spread, and the next champion on the list is there to be our Enfeeble tank. The boss's mechanics essentially always try and target the champion that has the Enfeeble debuff on it. So the idea behind this guy, Gnarlhorn right here, is he's going to be our Enfeeble tank. He's going to eat the Enfeeble debuff from the boss, and then the boss is constantly going to use all of his attacks against Gnarlhorn because Gnarlhorn has that buff, and the boss always wants to hit the target with that buff, or debuff, I should say. The nice thing about Gnarlhorn is his A1 ability here, which cannot strong, critical, or weak hit. This means that he can sit there with the Enfeeble debuff and he will never weak hit the boss. That is super, super important because every time you weak hit the boss, you drive up its shade counter. And if the boss ever takes a turn with a shade counter above 10, when it would normally use its A1 or A2 ability, or its A1 ability, it will instead use its A4 ability. The A1 gives it turn meter, so if it doesn't use the A1, it messes up the whole speed tune. So we'll talk a lot about this more in the section on dealing with the shade counter, but the inability for Gnarlhorn to weak hit is super, super important for controlling that shade counter. That's why we want to bring him in. So he's the next champion that's required on the list. And then the last champion that's a requirement is our old favorite, the Master of Cheese himself. That's right, Paragon. The idea behind this team is we have our cleanser running at a 3-to-4 ratio with the boss. We have our Gnarlhorn and our Paragon running at a 2-to-4 ratio with the boss, and we always sync it up so that Gnarlhorn goes, his unkillable buff falls off, then Paragon puts it back up right before the boss attacks him, and because Paragon keeps a 2-turn unkillable buff every 2 turns, he will have 100% uptime on our Gnarlhorn, resulting in our Gnarlhorn never dying, and the whole run just running smoothly. We basically can just run this infinitely. It doesn't matter how long it takes to finish, because the whole team will never die. It's essentially permanently unkillable. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't have to run this with the Paragon Gnarlhorn combo to do the unkillable. It's just by far the easiest way to keep Gnarlhorn alive, but if you want to bring in healers and other stuff, you can do that too. After that, it's just 2 DPS champions, and then you're perfectly good to go. So I'm going to jump over and show you a breakdown of all the different champion speeds, and we'll talk through how you end up build them in the most efficient way possible. Okay, so let's jump over to the actual tune. We've talked about this a little bit. The cleanser needs to run at a 3-to-4 ratio with the boss with their 3-turn cooldown cleanse. And then the only other requirement for this champion is that they need to have enough HP to avoid the boss's A1 targeting. If the boss thinks it can one-shot your champion, it will use its A1 on that champion instead of the Enfeeble tank, instead of Gnarlhorn. So probably around like 40,000 health seems to be plenty for all of my test runs so far. So build this champion with over 40,000 health, probably throw a little bit of defense on there, and make sure it's running at anywhere between 286 and 290 speed. In this video, I'm running at 287. All the speed ranges here, I've tested them in a calculator I made a little bit, and I think they all work, but there's possibly certain combinations that aren't working perfectly. Everything I've tried so far has worked. So this is what I have, but in the brackets, you see the actual speeds I use. So when in doubt, build those speeds exactly. Some of these are pretty narrow in terms of their speed. So I am, in this video, using Reliquary Tender at 287 speed. The cleanser doesn't need any masteries or anything like that. However, make sure they do not have any masteries that modify their turn meter. This is the same thing for speed tuning with Clan Boss. If you have anything like getting turn meter boosts when your champions get critical hit, it's going to completely mess up the tune, so make sure you don't take any of those masteries. The next two champions in terms of speed are two DPS champions. The same logic behind masteries applies. Don't take anything that will burn any turn meter. You can use any champions you want in these DPS slots with the caveat that they cannot mess with their or your allies' speed or turn meter in any way, right? So don't bring anybody who's going to increase speed, or don't bring a Razzlevarg who's going to increase his turn meter on his A1, at least if you want to use this specific tune here. So Cold Heart is a perfect one. Royal Guard, any of the max HP nukers are all fantastic for this. Lots of awakening levels are really helpful for dealing with the shade counter. We're going to talk about that in more detail later, but just keep in mind that when you're planning your champions that have a lot of awakening levels are going to be helpful for making sure that shade counter stays down. Okay, next champion on the list is our Gnarlhorn. He's moving between 180 and 188 speed. In terms of his build, you basically need to make sure that he does not die on the very first hit of the boss. And the boss is going to have a very high chance to critically hit him, because the boss is going to have a 50% base crit rate, and then it's going to get 15% more because Gnarlhorn is the wrong affinity. So you actually do need to build Gnarlhorn very tanky to make sure that he doesn't die on that first hit. Another option is to put him in triple reaction accessories so that the boss can't critically hit him and on the first turn, and then that will solve the problem as well, but you might not have 3 sets of reaction accessories to put on a champion like this. So build him tanky. Other than that, putting him in retaliation or revenge gear is nice, because it will help reduce, or it will cause him to counterattack and get more War Master hits and that kind of stuff in. Masteries are the same deal. It doesn't matter. I don't have any masteries on mine. Actually, that's not true. I have like a couple of tier 1 masteries, but nothing important on mine yet, although I'll farm those in the future. And then the next champion is our Paragon. Paragon needs to move between 176 and 178 speed. Again, he must have enough HP so that he doesn't become the target for the boss's A1. So like 40,000 health should be fine. I like to build him in a toxic set because why not? He'll put up some poisons on the boss, and more damage just speeds up the run. That being said, it does not matter how fast these runs are. I'm going to show you in this video very long runs. Of course, this is because I didn't build my champions particularly well, and I just kind of threw random stuff in there. I'm eventually going to use this same tune with a more like legendaries, champions, and stuff like that. But this is just a showcase of how the speed tune actually works and that it can last a long time. That's it. Those are the speed tunes. So from there, let's go ahead and jump into the run, and we'll talk about how the shade counter works. Okay, first things first, before we show the actual fight, we need to show the presets. So, presets are pretty easy. In terms of Gnarlhorn, we want to turn off his A2 and his A3 ability. His A2 ability, his A2 ability just tries to provoke, which obviously can't land. It puts up an increased defense. This serves no purpose. We should always just use his A1 instead of his A2, unless we're trying to actually keep him alive, because this will cause him to reduce the boss's shade counter thanks to the 2 awakenings levels that he has. His A3 ability puts up an unkillable buff on himself. If he has unkillable on himself, then Paragon won't put it on him. It will only put him on him if he doesn't have one. So we can't use this ability at all. Just turn it off. Just have Gnarlhorn use his A1 over and over and over again. The other thing is we want Gnarlhorn to be the lead champion because in general, Paragon will try and prioritize the lead when he's putting up his unkillable. So make sure you put it there. I haven't tried putting Gnarlhorn less than lead and seeing if Paragon would put it up because he's not at full health. But either way, I think it's just way safer. Put Gnarlhorn in the lead so that Paragon always uses unkillable on Gnarlhorn. The rest of the champions, the turn order doesn't matter. Aethel, her stuff doesn't matter. Oh, I turned this off earlier because I was messing with things. We can turn this back on. I'm not going to use Aethel in the long run on this team because I just bring it in here as a showcase, as a rare. I have a Mistrider Dythe that I think I'll bring in instead, but that doesn't matter. You don't care. She just does whatever. Reliquary Tender, this one is important. She needs to open with her A1 ability because the boss is going to put his A2 or his A3 out, and then she's going to A1, and then the boss is going to spread the debuffs on his next turn, and then Reliquary Tender is going to cleanse. So we need to have her make sure she syncs it up so that she doesn't cleanse on her first turn or try and revive or heal or anything like that. She's always just going to attack with her A1 on her first turn. Paragon, we need to, I have Life Shackles turned off. Actually, that's fine. We can turn that back on. No reason not to. But we do need to make sure that his unkillable is the first priority. I think he uses this by default anyway, but it doesn't hurt to set it up so that he prioritizes his A2 unkillable ability. Cold Heart is again just a DPS. It doesn't matter what she does. I have her set to always use Heartseeker. I don't know if she does this automatically. She probably does, but again, she's just a DPS. It doesn't matter what she does. Okay, so let's go ahead and start this run. My Gnarlhorn is actually not built tanky enough to survive the first hit if he gets crit, because I just need to redo his build. It sucks. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but we'll go ahead and jump in this real quick. Okay, so first turn, boss is going to hit our Gnarlhorn. And you can see that Gnarlhorn is pretty low on health, but he survived, so that's fine. And now Reliquary is going to take her next turn. I'm going to press auto, and we'll manual this fight. So again, this will normally will run fine on auto, but we'll just show it. We're going to A1 on her ability. Okay, so now we've got the DPS. They'll both take their turns. And boom, there goes Cold Heart. Okay, so again, we're going to A1 on Gnarlhorn. And then right before the boss takes another turn, Paragon is going to give us unkillable. Okay, boom, the boss just spread. And look, Reliquary Tender comes up perfectly to cleanse. And there we go. And now I'm just going to press auto and we can just watch it run. Okay, one thing to notice, the shade counter was 13. Well, here, we'll let this fight run. We'll talk about it for a few stages, then we'll talk about shade counter. So here we go. We're going through our cycle again. Paragon just uses ability. Boss nukes our Gnarlhorn. Everyone's going to take their turn. And then we're going to see the boss go again. Remember, we're running on a 2-to-4 ratio with the boss. And then Gnarlhorn goes. Paragon puts up increase or unkillable. And then the cycle repeats. There we go. We just remained permanently unkillable. Okay, now we have to talk about the shade counter. The shade counter is a huge portion of managing this fight and managing the speed tune. What you need to know is that, okay, so the boss's shade counter increases in a few different ways. First off, every time the boss critically strikes your champion, it will increase the shade counter by 5. Furthermore, every time the boss puts up the enfeeble, right here, we're going to watch. Every time the boss puts up the enfeeble debuff and you cleanse it off, every time you cleanse the enfeeble, it increases the boss's shade counter by 2. So we're going to watch. The boss just crit Gnarlhorn. He had 0 turn meter. He crit Gnarlhorn. He went up to 5, and now he's going to be at 13. Boom. If the boss was about to take his turn right now, he's above 10, he would use his A4 and he wouldn't use his A1, and that's important because the A1 has this each hit fills Akumori's turn meter by 20%. If he doesn't use his A1 and he uses his A3 or A5, A4, uses A4 instead, it will completely wreck the speed tune. Even though it's low enough that he wouldn't hit through the unkillable, it, like, honestly, if he used this attack, it wouldn't matter. It would be fine. It wouldn't kill anyone. But because it wouldn't get the turn meter boost from the A1, it would mess up the tune. So that's important. We need to make sure then we get the shade counter below 10 before the boss takes his next turn. And so Athel's going to come in and she's going to reduce it by 4, which brings it down to 9. And then Coldheart's going to reduce it by another 3. And there we go. And then Gnarlhorn's going to reduce it by 2. So we've got it below 10, and now the boss is not going to use that ability. So we'll press auto again, and we're off to the races. So, what is the maximum amount of shade counter the boss can get in a full 4-turn cycle? Well, he attacks 4 times, and he has a very high % chance to crit. He like 75% or more, plus whatever his shade counter is at currently. So he has a very high % chance to crit. We'll just assume that he's going to crit every time. If he crits every time, he's going to generate a total of 20 shade counters. That's 5 per hit, 4 hits, 20. And then every time we cleanse it off, the Enfeebles, we're going to generate or give him 8 more shade counter. So on a 4-turn cycle, we need to make sure we are reducing the shade counter by 28 in total. That's the logic behind the whole cycle. So I'm going to show you a spreadsheet after this fight is done that can let you put in the awakening levels on all your different champions to figure out if you're going to actually reduce the shade counter by enough. But that's the idea. We need to do at least 28. Now, there's a little extra caveat to this, and that we also need to make sure we're getting it below 10. In this cycle right here, in the A2, A3 cycle, we need to make sure that we're reducing the shade counter back down to 10. You see that he crit us, and he came in with, well, he could have come in with 8 right there. And then we cleanse it off and give him another 8, so he could have had 16 in this particular run. So we need to make sure we're doing... actually, well, okay, maybe a better way to say this. He can crit us twice, and we cleanse it once. So in theory, he can generate a maximum of 18 shade counter between his A3 and his A2 ability. That means we need to reduce that shade counter by at least 9 in that process. So that involves... so it will show that in the spreadsheet, like what kind of blessings you need to make that happen. To be honest, if you can get the 28 done, I can't imagine a scenario where you couldn't also reduce it by 9 in that 2-turn cycle. I don't think it would even be possible, but just keep that in mind. Okay, so that's the fight. We're letting this run. You can see that this fight is pretty long, and that's because we're not really bringing in real DPS champions. In terms of like Aethel and stuff like that. We have no Brimstone Blessing, we have no HP burn, we have none of that stuff. So I would strongly recommend building different DPS champions than these, and maybe not doing an all rare team, bring in some legendary blessings and that kind of stuff, and you could speed this run up significantly. So don't read too much into the actual runtime, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's not about the speed in this particular comp, it's just about showing how this is a fully sustainable run. And it can go forever. It's permanently unkillable. It will never fail as long as we meet all these different conditions of making sure we're reducing the shade counter, we're hitting the cleanses, and we're keeping the unkillable buff up on our enfeeble tank. So I'm going to go ahead and just let this finish because we've only got a couple minutes left. This run is even longer than normal. But yeah, anyway, there we go. Just cycling it through again. We've run it over and over and over again. In terms of good DPS champions, obviously max HP champions are great. Don't bring in any spirit champions, because if they weak hit the boss, they can increase the shade counter. That will be a massive problem. So Newt would be a fantastic champion to bring in here, but obviously that is not going to work. I think Acrizia doesn't work because her passive. So Coldheart's a great option, especially because it's easy to get her awakened because she's a rare. But, you know, any DPS champion you want to bring in will work perfectly as long as you hit the tunes here and they don't mess with their turn meter in any way. All right, are we going to kill the boss? Come on. Here we go. 7-minute run. This is rough, man. This is rough. I'm definitely going to rebuild a different team based on this same concept that'll do this faster. But there. Coldheart. Come on. Come on, there we go. All right, the boss is down. And there you go, our extremely free-to-play friendly team to take down the Phantom Shogun's Grove on stage 25 using all rare champions. So let me jump into the spreadsheet real quick to cover the last thing, which is just making sure that you have enough awakenings to completely take care of the boss's shade counter. All right, so forgive the blinding white spreadsheet, but this is going to be how you determine whether you have enough blessings to make sure that you're completely controlling for the boss's shade counter generation. So first off, if you want to make a copy of the spreadsheet, let me point this out real quick before a million people try and request access to the spreadsheet. Click File, Make a Copy, and then you will get a copy that you can edit for yourself, because the one that's going to be linked in the description is not going to be accessible or editable because otherwise a bunch of people would make a mess of it. So how does this work? Okay, so essentially what we have is our team here, and everyone on the team is running at a 2-turn cycle, except for our cleanser, which is running at a 3-turn cycle. That being said, our cleanser is using 1 turn to cleanse, obviously. And so this only counts abilities that actually hit the boss, because you need to hit the boss in order to reduce the shade counter with your awakenings. So reality is that the cleanser only gets 2 turns per cycle that actually hit the boss to reduce the shade counter. So we have 2 turns per cycle, 3 blessings on the cleanser, gives us a total of 6 per cycle. Then we can go through all the rest of our champions. This one's pretty easy. I was messing around with this with a bunch of other stuff. Everyone's running on 2-turn cycle. The only exception is Paragon, who's running at a 1-turn cycle. It's a little misleading. Sometimes he runs at 1, sometimes he runs at 2, but because he's running at a 2-to-4 ratio with the boss, actually, I guess he's always running. Yeah. Anyway, he's running a 2-to-4 ratio with the boss. He is using one of his turns to put up the unkillable buff, which doesn't hit the boss, so he's not reducing the shade counter when he does that. Gnarlhorn, this is partly why we turn off all of his abilities except for his A1, so that he'll hit twice per cycle, and the DPS are each going to hit twice per cycle. So you just put in the number of blessings that you have on your champions. You put in, well, leave this as it is, and that will give you the total turns per cycle, or the total number of shade counter reductions per cycle that you're going to do. Remember, I said in the worst case scenario, the boss crits you 4 times, 5 shade counters each, which is 20, and then you cleanse off the enfeeble for another 8, so he can generate a maximum of 28 shade counters per cycle. We have this perfectly in the team that I have here, where we're removing 28 every turn. So even in a worst case scenario where the boss crits us every single time, we're still going to completely eliminate the shade counter, and we won't have any problems. It'll be 100% success. If this is not at 28, if it's a little less than 28, that doesn't necessarily mean the team won't work, but it means if the boss crits you every single time, your shade counter will slowly creep up, and that can be a problem if it gets to the point where it starts using its A4 ability. It will completely kill the run. So just keep that in mind. The other one here is I talked about the A3, A2 cycle. What's important here is that Paragon does not actually take a turn during this cycle, and neither does the cleanser. Both of these two are using abilities that do not hit the boss, and so we only have 3 champions that are actually hitting the boss, and between that A3 and that A2, the boss can crit us twice, and then we cleanse, which makes a total of 18, and we need to get it below 10 so that the boss doesn't use his A4. So in this video, or in this team right here, I have 9. So 18 minus 9 is 9. Boss won't do anything. We'll be fine. But this value basically needs to be 9, and this value needs to be at least 28. And that's how you use the spreadsheet. Cool. So I think that's pretty much going to be it for this team. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it pretty cool that we could do this fight with all these rare champions and essentially use Paragon cheese to kill the boss. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. I release quite a few videos on my free-to-play series, and I also do interesting speed tunes and stuff like this. So if you like that kind of content, check it out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.